Hello everyone, and welcome back to the newest episode of Hoài Ca and Hung's story. After days of worry, the couple took little Tony to the provincial hospital for a full medical checkup. The results made their hearts sink. The doctor informed them that Tony was experiencing delayed speech and slower reflexes compared to other children his age. From that very moment, a new journey began for their small family. Hoài Ca decided to take a temporary break from work and stay at the hospital with Hung to accompany their son through therapy. Every morning, the two walked hand in hand with Tony down the long hospital corridor, where other children were also trying their best each day, just like their son. Those little exercises, those bursts of laughter, sometimes mixed with tears, gradually became part of their everyday rhythm. Though exhaustion often weighed on them, the light in Hung and Hoài Ca's eyes never faded. Because they believed that with love and patience, Tony would one day learn to speak, to smile, and to walk confidently like any other child. Stay tuned for today's episode to see how Tony's healing journey begins, and how the love of Hoài Ca and Hung will help their son overcome this challenge. The morning in the city began with the distant hum of traffic, blending with the soft whirring of a ceiling fan spinning steadily inside a small rented room. The first light of day slipped through the thin curtain, scattering golden streaks across the worn tile floor. In that quiet space, little Tony sat cross-legged in the middle of the room, his tiny hands gripping colorful plastic blocks, eyes following the gentle clatter they made as they touched. Hoài Ca sat nearby, her back resting lightly against the wall, fingers intertwined. Her hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck, a few loose strands falling over her forehead, remnants of a restless night. She watched her son with a tender gaze, one filled with love but also shadowed by an unspoken worry, a fear she couldn't quite name, only buried deep within. Hung sat at the small table in the corner, quietly checking the travel bag while keeping an eye on his wife and child. Inside that bag were a few neatly folded clothes, a small notebook listing the doctor's appointment time, and the handkerchief Hoài Ca often used to wipe Tony's sweat. He handled everything carefully, as if one careless move might somehow make their fragile little world crumble. The room was barely 10 square meters, yet to them, it was a shelter amid uncertainty. The walls were stained with old paint, the ceiling fan creaked faintly, and in the tiny kitchen corner sat a few dented aluminum pots. Still, everything was neatly arranged. On a small wooden shelf, Hoài Ca placed a freshly warmed cup of milk, its steam curling into the air. Beside it lay a tiny box of medicine labeled Tony in her round, gentle handwriting. Outside the window, the sun climbed higher, flooding the room with light. Tony looked up at the beam of sunshine, his clear eyes sparkling with innocent curiosity. He reached out a small hand toward the glow and giggled, a soft, fleeting sound that made Hoài Ca's heart suddenly feel lighter. She bent down, gently stroked his back, and whispered in a voice as tender as the morning breeze. "You're such a good boy. We're going to speech class soon, okay?" Tony didn't answer. He simply lifted a plastic block to his mouth, then set it down again, continuing to play with the worn toy he had brought from their village. Hung watched them quietly, his lips pressed together. In his eyes lay both deep worry and firm resolve. He said nothing, only stepped forward to adjust his son's collar, then bent down to pick up a fallen bottle cap. Each small gesture carried a quiet kind of love, steady, patient, and full of meaning. Time moved slowly. The clock's hands ticked softly, blending with the rhythm of their calm breaths, a peaceful morning, heavy with unspoken emotion. And in that cramped little room, love itself became the light, the very light that kept them standing strong through the long road ahead. That morning, the city was louder and more vibrant than usual. Car horns echoed from the wide streets, blending with the cheerful sounds of the morning market and the hurried chatter of people passing by. Amid the bustling crowd, Hoài Ca bent down slightly, holding tightly onto Tony's small hand. The little boy walked slowly, his wide eyes filled with hesitation, as if he had stepped into an entirely unfamiliar world. Before them, tall glass buildings shimmered under the bright sunlight. The roadside trees swayed gently in the wind, a few golden leaves of early autumn fluttering down. Tony stopped in front of a small park, where other children were laughing and playing on shiny swings and slides. He stood still for a long moment, his gaze a mix of excitement and fear, his tiny hand refusing to let go of his mother's. Hoài crouched down, smiling softly as she whispered, "Do you want to play, Tony?" Tony didn't answer. He glanced at the slide, then clung even closer to her leg. At that moment, Hùng stepped forward, his voice calm and reassuring. "Come on, we're right here. It's okay." His eyes were warm, full of encouragement. Hoài nodded gently and released Tony's hand, leaving just a small space between the three of them, enough for Tony to take a step on his own. The boy hesitated for a moment, then slowly moved forward, placing one tiny foot on the first step of the slide. Step by step, he reached towards something new. Hùng held out his arms, a kind smile spreading across his suntanned face. Tony slid down, his hair flying back in the wind, and then came that sound, a burst of laughter, bright and pure. A sound so light and beautiful that even the passers-by turned to look. Hoài stood there silently, watching her son, tears glimmering in her eyes. Tony's laughter filled the park, carried away by the breeze, washing away months of heaviness and worry. Hùng walked over and gently touched her shoulder. They looked at each other, no words were needed. One shared smile was enough to say it all. No matter how long the road ahead might be, they would walk it together. In the distance, the sun had climbed higher, its light spilling across the park. Young leaves rustled softly, as if to celebrate that small but precious moment. A morning that marked the beginning of a new journey. One of hope, love, and a faith that would never fade. The therapy room door closed with a sharp click, a small sound, yet it felt unbearably heavy. In that instant, Hoài heart clenched. She stood still, eyes fixed through the frosted glass at Tony, who sat curled up in the corner on a small blue plastic chair. The little boy held tightly to his old stuffed animal, the one she had brought from their hometown, knowing he couldn't sleep without it. Inside, the white room was bright and sterile, walls covered with pictures of objects, numbers, and letters. The therapist's voice sounded calm and gentle, just clear enough to be heard through the door. "Hello, Tony. Come here with me, okay? We're just going to play a little, it's all right." At first, there was only silence in reply. Tony sat still, eyes fixed on the floor, his breathing quick and uneven. Then suddenly, a small cry broke out, trembling and fragile, like fear that had been trapped too long in a tiny chest finally finding its way out. Startled, Hoài hands began to shake. She took an instinctive step toward the door. But Hung's firm hand gently pressed onto her shoulder, stopping her. "We have to let him learn to adjust," he said softly, his voice deep and steady. "He'll grow stronger this way." Hoài froze in place. She couldn't speak. Her lips trembled, her eyes glued to the dim glow of the room beyond the glass. Each sound of her son's crying tugged painfully at her heart, love and helplessness twisted together. A tear slipped down, then another, warm against her pale cheek. She tried to breathe deeply, but every inhale felt heavier. Tony's sobs continued, broken by the clatter of a toy falling to the floor. Beside her, Hùng stayed silent. He didn't dare look directly at his wife, just kept his strong, warm hand on her shoulder, a silent message that he, too, was hurting, but they both had to learn to be brave. Time moved painfully slow. The clock's ticking echoed down the hallway, each tick-tock pressing deeper into their chests. Only 10 minutes passed, yet for Hoài Ca, it felt like an eternity. Gradually, the crying inside began to fade. Only faint sniffles remained, mingling with the therapist's patient voice. "Good job, Tony. You're doing so well. Look at me now, that's it, very good." Those gentle words felt like a thin thread reaching out, giving the mother something to hold on to, something to help her breathe again. She leaned back against the wall, her hands clasped tightly over her chest. Her eyes never left the room, the small space where her son was learning to meet a new world. Across from her, Hùng remained silent, though in his eyes there was pride, sorrow, and a lingering worry that he couldn't quite hide. When the door finally opened, light spilled out into the hallway, making Hoài Ca flinch. The therapist stepped out, her kind face soft with a reassuring smile. "He still cried a bit," she said, "but today, he stayed in his seat and didn't try to run away. That's a very important first step." At those words, Hoài Ca could only nod. She wanted to smile, but her lips quivered, her voice caught in her throat. Her emotions swirled, relief tangled with fear, hope brushing against exhaustion. Hùng looked at her quietly, his gaze calm but full of faith. The therapist added gently, "If he adjusts well in about 10 days, we can let him stay for full-day sessions. Then we'll begin working on reflexes and basic communication." Hoài Ca bowed her head, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Yes. I understand." Together, they walked slowly down the hallway. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the long windows, casting a pale golden strip across the tiled floor. Hoài Ca held Hung's hand tightly, as if to anchor herself amid the storm of emotions inside. Neither said a word. Only the warmth of his hand, the sound of their quiet footsteps, and the fading light across the floor remained. A fragile yet enduring reminder that tomorrow, maybe, things would be just a little better. The days that followed passed slowly, steadily, like the quiet rhythm of a simple life built on quiet perseverance. Each morning, sunlight filtered through the narrow window of their small rented room, spreading over the stained tile floor. The old ceiling fan hummed steadily, blending with the distant murmur of city streets outside. Every day, Hùng woke early. He rode his worn-out motorbike to the little market at the street corner, buying a few lunch boxes, some boiled vegetables, a bit of braised fish, then stopped by a convenience stall to pick up milk and biscuits for Tony. The motorbike came to a halt in front of the humble food stall. Steam rose from the pots, mingling with the smell of oil and soy sauce, heavy, familiar, and oddly comforting. With the warm food bag in his hand, he let out a long sigh, tired, yet somehow content. When he returned, Hoài Ca had already woken Tony. The boy was still half asleep, rubbing his eyes, his hair sticking out in every direction. Patiently, Hoài Ca fed him spoon by spoon, then changed his clothes and got him ready for therapy. The soft morning light touched her face, revealing traces of exhaustion, but still, she looked gentle, calm, and full of warmth. At noon, the three of them sat together, eating from their lunch boxes in the small room. The rice cooled quickly, but they ate side by side, silently, with only the soft clink of spoons against plastic. The ceiling fan spun above, its steady hum marking time, the soundtrack of a life that was fragile yet filled with love. After lunch, Tony played for a while and then drifted into sleep. He lay on his side, arms wrapped around his old stuffed animal, his breathing slow and even. Watching him, Hoài Ca felt her heart quiet down. All the long nights of worry, all the waiting hours in hospital corridors, they seemed to fade away in this moment of peace. She whispered softly, afraid to wake him. "As long as our son stays healthy, I can endure anything." Hùng sat nearby, clearing up the dishes while glancing at her. He didn't speak right away. After a moment, he smiled, a small, gentle smile, as humble as the man himself. "Hang in there, my love," he said quietly. "I'll take care of you both." The words were simple, but they made her eyes sting. Not from sadness, but from the strength she could feel in every syllable, the kind of strength that comes from someone who carries the whole sky on his shoulders without complaint. A light breeze slipped through the crack in the window, swaying the thin curtain. The smell of rice, milk, and sunlight mingled in the air, the familiar scent of their modest but warm days. The tiny room, though cramped, overflowed with love, a love woven from shared meals, soft laughter, and those quiet moments where no words were needed at all. After a few days, things slowly began to change. Tony no longer burst into tears the moment he entered the classroom. He started smiling when he saw his teacher, his round eyes shining with both familiarity and curiosity. The first sounds he made were still broken and unclear, but they were enough to make Hoài Ca's heart tremble with emotion. She stood by the classroom door, watching her son point toward a red ball, then softly utter a few simple sounds. His voice was small, his words short, yet they carried the weight of countless hopes, enough to make her turn away quickly to wipe the tears sliding down her cheeks. Beside her, Hùng stood quietly, his hands tucked in his pockets, a gentle smile on his face and a glimmer of joy in his eyes. Neither spoke. They simply watched, and in that moment, all the exhaustion and hardship seemed to melt away. That afternoon, when class ended, a soft breeze drifted through the hallway. Tony came out, his cheeks flushed with sweat, clutching the small toy his teacher had given him. He looked up and, seeing his parents, let out a giggle, bright, innocent, and as warm as the setting sun. Hoài Ca bent down to greet him, her voice trembling. "You did so well, my brave boy." Tony didn't fully understand her words. He just laughed louder and nuzzled into her shoulder. Beside them, Hung's eyes glistened as he gently patted his wife's shoulder, wordlessly saying that every struggle, every sleepless night, had been worth it. On their way home, he spoke softly. "Maybe we should let him attend an extra session in the afternoon. If he practices more, he might improve faster." Hoài Ca turned to look at him, her gaze tender yet determined. "Yes, I was thinking the same. We've come this far, we have to give it our all. As long as our son learns to speak, no hardship will ever matter." Her words fell softly into the late afternoon air, mingling with the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. They stopped under the awning of the therapy center, where the sunset spilled golden orange light across the pavement. Sitting side by side, they said nothing, only listened to the faint laughter of children playing in the distance and the lingering song of cicadas marking the season's end. The glow of dusk lit up their faces, highlighting beads of sweat on their foreheads, the sunburnt skin, and the weariness in their eyes after so many long days. Yet within those eyes still burned a quiet, steadfast faith, the kind that keeps people standing, no matter how hard the journey gets. Because they knew, even if the road was difficult, as long as Tony could smile, as long as he took one small step forward, every struggle, every worry, would always be worth it. Late in the afternoon, golden sunlight streamed through the small window, slipping into their cramped rented room. On the old wooden table, two simple lunch boxes still steamed faintly, the scent of boiled greens and braised fish mingling with the dusty air of the city. Beside them, Tony sat holding a plastic spoon, eating and playing at the same time, occasionally looking up to flash a pure, innocent smile. That little sound of laughter seemed to soften the whole room, washing away the fatigue of a long day. As she fed her son, Hoài Ca spoke softly, her tone gentle and wistful. "The other day I bought 2 bunches of bananas from the old lady near our land. She said she'd save them for us, but now we can't make it back in time. I'm afraid they'll ripen too soon." Her voice carried a hint of sadness, part worry for the old woman, part homesickness for the small garden they had left behind weeks ago. Across from her, Hung held a pair of worn chopsticks, smiling faintly. The dim lamp above cast a warm light over his tanned face, where a trace of sweat still lingered on his forehead. He set the chopsticks down, looked up at his wife, and said in his calm, steady voice, "A promise is a promise. I'll go back and help you harvest them." It was a simple sentence, nothing poetic or grand, yet it made Hoài Ca's heart soften. She looked at him, her eyes glowing, lips trembling slightly. In these restless days far from home, even the smallest act of thoughtfulness was enough to make her feel protected, cared for. Outside, the last rays of sunlight filtered through the thin curtain, casting a warm glow across their faces. The noise of traffic faded into the distance, leaving only the creaking sound of the old ceiling fan spinning slowly above. Hoài Ca gazed quietly at her husband, the man who never spoke big words or made distant promises, but always remembered the smallest things, from buying milk for their son to keeping his word about the bananas promised to an old woman back home. She smiled, a soft, tender smile, carrying within it a deep gratitude. The rice in their boxes grew cold, yet the room itself felt warmer. Warmed by the soft yellow light, by the steady rhythm of their breaths, and by the quiet love they shared through these difficult, uncertain days. Tony looked up, clutching his spoon, babbling a few unclear sounds. Hoài Ca laughed, brushing his hair aside, while Hung simply watched, his smile growing gentler. And in that simple, fleeting moment, both of them felt it. That even if life was still hard, as long as they had each other, somehow everything felt lighter. Night fell, and the city slowly sank into stillness. The streetlights cast their hazy glow through the dusty window, painting faint golden patches across the worn, uneven wall. Inside the small rented room, everything grew quiet, only the steady hum of the fan and the soft rhythm of a child's breathing remained. Tony lay curled up under a thin blanket, his breath as light as the whisper of wind outside. His hair was tousled, and his tiny hand still loosely held onto the old stuffed toy he loved so dearly. Beside him, Hoài Ca sat in silence, her gaze fixed on her son's gentle breathing. Her heart swelled with a mix of tenderness, gratitude, and fear of disturbing the fragile hope that had begun to flutter quietly within her chest. In the corner, Hung quietly tidied up the leftover lunch boxes. The faint clink of a spoon against plastic echoed softly in the room's stillness. He washed the dishes in a small basin by the stove, each movement careful and slow, as if afraid to shatter the rare peace that blanketed their home. Then he dried his hands with an old towel and spoke in a low, steady voice. "I have to leave for work the day after tomorrow, but call me if you need anything, okay? You and our boy, stay strong. I believe he'll start speaking soon." His words carried calmness, yet beneath them was a quiet promise, one that needed no further explanation. Hoài Ca looked up, her eyes meeting his in the faint glow of the bedside lamp. She smiled, a small, fragile smile that tried to hold back the tide of emotion rising inside her. But then the tears came anyway, warm and silent, tracing down her cheeks. She whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "I know, don't worry about us. As long as he's healthy, I can endure anything." Hung said nothing. He simply stepped closer and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. In his eyes, there was love, trust, and a sadness too deep for words. Inside that tiny room, the two sat side by side. No grand gestures, no need for conversation, only the quiet warmth between them filling the space. Outside, the city's noises faded one by one. Far away, a car horn echoed and then disappeared, leaving only the whisper of the night wind slipping through the cracks in the door. The dim streetlight glowed against the window, illuminating the young mother's face, weary, yet still soft and full of quiet strength. Then, Tony stirred in his sleep. His lips parted slightly, and a faint sound escaped, so soft it seemed only his mother could hear it. Hoài Ca froze, her heart skipping a beat. She bent closer, her breath trembling, as his lips moved again, a fragile murmur, not yet a word, but enough to make tears fall faster, one by one, hot against her skin. Just a single sound, but to her, it was a miracle. In the golden hush of that dimly lit room, with the curtains swaying gently in the night breeze, the young mother smiled through her tears, her trembling hand brushing her son's hair. The small rented room stayed silent, but in that silence, something began to bloom. A glimmer of hope, tiny yet enduring, unfurling in the dark and lighting up a mother's soul. It is a journey of love, of faith, and of patience. A path not lined with roses, but filled with tiny footsteps and fleeting smiles that glow in the darkest of days. Hùng and Hoài Ca chose this road, not because it was easy, but because they believed that as long as they kept holding hands, as long as hope still lived within their hearts, then no matter how long the road to healing might be, there would always be light at the end. They had endured long nights of worry, mornings waking in their cramped rented room to the hum of the fan and the noise of the city outside. There had been tears, exhaustion, and moments when they nearly broke. But also quiet smiles, small nods of encouragement, and steadfast glances that reminded them they were not alone. Each day, when Tony smiled, when he managed to form a new sound, when his little hands reached out to be held, or when he looked into his mother's eyes and uttered a faint it marked another milestone in the long journey they shared. No one knew when it would end, but they understood, this was a road worth walking. Because along it were love, hope, and family. Amid the noise of the city, amid the endless weight of everyday worries, these two ordinary people kept walking side by side. With a love stronger than hardship, and a faith that refused to waver. For they knew, happiness doesn't live at the destination, but in every step taken together through the storm. And sometimes, just one glance, one smile, one hand reaching for another, is enough to light the whole journey ahead. That journey hasn't ended yet. With each passing day, Hoài Ca and Hùng continue to learn, to love more deeply, to be more patient, and to keep believing in the path they've chosen. In the days to come, how much further will Tony progress? Will that little smile become the source of strength that keeps their family moving forward? Stay tuned for the next episode to find out. And don't forget to leave a comment to cheer on Hoài Ca, Hùng, and little Tony.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay thì mình tiếp tục đưa đến với mọi người video tiếp theo về câu chuyện của Lý Hoài Ca và Kỳ San Hùng. Hôm nay thì mình đang đi làm tập tiếp theo đây mọi người. Thì trong tập này thì Hùng và Hoài Ca đang là điều trị liệu cho Tony. Tuy nhiên là một số điều khó khăn đã xảy ra. Sao nó lại như thế này? Chứ rồi làm lộ ảnh rồi. Mình làm lộ ảnh không đeo rồi, phải sửa lại thôi. Sao vậy? Chị đang ở đeo con. Tí nữa là chị ạ. 1 phút nữa chị chưa xong việc. Đợi 1 phút. Nó ăn sao?